The last thing any writer wants is to have a floppy novel. Tension is often what keeps readers reading, and mastering tension will help you master your novel. You'll hear tension talked about a lot in the writing world, either directly or indirectly through other topics like story structure or pacing. Tension is one of those fundamental metrics of good storytelling. Every writer needs to understand tension, and this video will help you do that. Tension is what makes a reader stay up all night to finish a book. It's what gets a reader's heart rate up. It's what makes them laugh and cry and do all the other emotional expression stuff that you humans do. You want lots of tension in your story. If your novel is lacking tension, or it possibly has too much tension, or it doesn't have tension in the right spots, then you are going to have some unhappy readers. Let's start by defining tension in a literary context. Tension is fundamentally a combination of two things: emotional investment on the part of the reader and uncertainty about the events or characters that they've become emotionally invested in. The first part is obvious. Tension is really about creating a heightened emotional state in the reader, and it's hard for them to have that if the reader doesn't care about what's going on in your story. In order for the reader to feel any tension about the plot or the characters in your story, they need to be invested in the story in some way. Likeable characters, well-defined stakes, and an intriguing plot are all things that will get readers emotionally invested in the story. Other things like very evocative prose, if you write really good descriptions that help ground readers in a scene, that will help them to feel more emotion and get them more invested in your story. You, the writer, ultimately have to give the reader something to care about and then threaten the thing that the reader cares about with uncertainty. If you do that, you'll have tension up the wazoo. Which brings us to the other element of tension, which is uncertainty. The uncertainty that the reader has about how a given story beat is going to play out is the other major element that goes into tension. Are the love interests going to get together? Is the evil villain's giant microwave oven going to boil the oceans? How is the hero going to survive falling off this cliff? Whenever the reader doesn't know how something is going to get solved or how something is going to play out, you're going to have some tension. Tension arises out of uncertainty. If you know the ending of a story, if you know that things are going to work out just fine, then there's no tension. This uncertainty about whether an outcome will be positive or negative will make the reader anxious to know the result and will keep them reading. This will increase the tension. Not enough uncertainty about a positive outcome is a problem, but too much uncertainty about a positive outcome is likewise a problem for tension. Tension exists in this sort of habitable zone between a negative outcome that is almost certain and a positive outcome that is also certain. Let's say that the heroic home sports ball team is down by 1 point in the final game of the championship. That's going to create more tension because we are so close to both a positive and a negative outcome. The story could go either way because the team just needs to score 1 point. Now let's imagine that the home team is leading by 10 points. That's going to remove a lot of tension because a positive outcome is almost certain. The heroes can basically coast to victory. There's no tension because we've moved too far into the direction of certainty. At the same time, if the home team is behind by 10 points, that will make the situation seem too hopeless. There is too low of a chance of positive outcome, and likewise the tension will go down because we are certain or almost certain that the outcome is going to be negative. Now, a lot of stories do move into hopeless territory, where you put the characters in an almost completely hopeless situation that they are going to have a very hard time getting out of. This is called the darkest hour trope. It's a very common trope. It works very well. Lots of stories use it, but you have to recognize that the darkest hour part of a story is usually fairly low in tension. Most of the time in The Darkest Hour, the reader is not on the edge of their seat. Usually the story slows down, it takes on a more melancholic tone. Usually there's some introspection, maybe some emotional conversations. But The Darkest Hour, when you move down that axis, is usually not a high tension moment. That's not necessarily a problem because the purpose of The Darkest Hour is not to raise tension. What happens at the end of The Darkest Hour is usually the heroes find some kind of new solution, or the sports ball team has a late game rally and scores a bunch of points, or they discover some kind of weakness in the evil villain. That's when we move out of the hopelessness phase of the story. We actually decrease the certainty of a negative outcome, increase the uncertainty, and the tension ramps back up because the probability of a positive outcome has now increased. We have moved back into that habitable zone of uncertainty where all tension lives. If you want to have a story that has a lot of tension, you can't move too far from either side of this middle ground. It is only when the probabilities of success or failure are close to 50-50 that you will get maximum tension. Although it could be argued that you want to move a little bit to the side of a more certain negative outcome in order to increase tension, because that raises stakes and probably makes the story a little bit more exciting. But still, you don't want to move too far into certainty of either a positive or a negative outcome. It is also important to point out that maximized tension is not necessarily what you want all of the time. More tension will usually improve a story, but only up to a certain point. Tension is exciting, but it's also tiring. Every story needs moments of high tension, interspersed with moments of lower tension. You don't want a constant linear increase in tension throughout the entire story. Even for something like a thriller, and thrillers are mainly about creating a sense of tension in the reader, you don't necessarily want all tension all the time, unless the story is really short, because dealing with a lot of tension for a long time is just exhausting for the reader. Some scenes in the story will be slower or faster and thus have higher or lower tension. Your characters might be clinging to the ledge for their lives in one scene and then relaxing in the hotel for the next scene. More tension is not necessarily better. In fact, having moments of lower tension interspersed throughout your story can actually help a lot. This is why having the right amount of tension is what you should strive for, not just more tension. It's also important to point out that a low tension scene is not necessarily a boring scene. Really good conversations between characters, or when characters are thinking about something, or they're just kind of relaxing and vibing together, those scenes can be really interesting for the reader, but they're not necessarily high in tension. Tension is one axis that can make a scene engaging and exciting, but if you have a scene with lower tension, it doesn't necessarily mean that that scene is going to be boring. Likewise, not all scenes that are high tension are filled with action and gunfights and car chases. You can have a scene that doesn't have a lot of action, but still delivers a lot of tension. You can have something like a very tense conversation between two characters, or a character professing their love to another character, or an interrogation scene. All of these sorts of scenes can be very high tension, even though there isn't a lot of physical action happening within the scene. Tension is more than just car chases and characters clinging off of rooftops and people jumping out of helicopters. It's a carefully constructed story mechanic that, when used in the proper amount, will keep readers engaged and make them more likely to want to really get to the end of your story. It doesn't matter how much action you put into a scene if the readers are not emotionally connected to your characters and your story on some level, then you will have no tension, even if you have a very high stakes, action-packed scene. The readers need to care. Also, remember that having more tension is not necessarily better. Tension is something that should be managed throughout the course of your novel. You want the right amount of tension, not just more and more of it. Speaking of the right amount of something, the length of this video is at the right amount, so I'm gonna stop talking. So there you have it. I would love to hear what you think about this video in the comments down below. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.